So those of you that have been following the channel for a while would know that back in September, I went out and made the biggest impulse buy in my life, which is the car I'm in right now, my 1986 Porsche 944, which I've named Vanessa. So I absolutely love this car. And I got it in terrible condition. It needed a boatload of work, but I have done most of that work. This thing's pretty much all squared away, and I think it's time to do a full bumper-to-bumper review on this car. So let's start off with a little history of the 944. So back in 1982, Porsche introduced the 944 to basically slot between the 924, which was their base entry-level sports car, and the big boy 911, which was their super high-performance top-of-the-line sports car. Now, the 944 was based on the 924, and you can see that in the way that it's styled. It looks like a 924 in a lot of ways. It has a similar front-end design with the pop-up headlamps. It has a similar roof line and rear deck lid with the similar taillights, but the 944 is different in a lot of crucial ways. You first notice the differences when you look at the front end and you see that the fender flares over the front wheels are a lot more aggressive. They flare out a lot more and they make the car seem a lot wider and a lot lower, which gives it a lot more sex appeal. The car looks a lot sleeker and it looks like the sexy sports car that the 924 always should have been, and it makes it look like a true Porsche. Now, when you move on to the sides of the doors and all that, they look very similar to the 924, but the 944 looks a whole lot longer and a whole lot lower than the 924 does. The 924 looked small and pinched, whereas the 944 looks long, low, and sleek. And helping that look are the rear fender flares over the side haunches over the rear wheels. They make the car look a whole lot wider and a whole lot more aggressive than the 924 looked, and all of that just comes together to make the 944 look like a true Porsche sports car. It looks sexy and it just looks like it's going fast even when it's standing still. I've had a lot of people tell me that when they see my car, even when it's not going all that quick on the road, it still looks like it's flying down the road, which I feel like was part of the whole appeal of this car. Now, it also has the classic pop-up headlamps that you got in a lot of mid-80s sports cars. I love them. You feel like a total baller when you flick the switch and they turn on. And I also love the rubber bumpers. I just feel like they make this car look a whole lot more classic, and they make it, I like the fact that they make it look a little lower. I feel like that's what they were going for, and honestly, I love that look. It's just really, really awesome. And I also love the spoiler on this car. It's made of rubber and it's molded into the rear liftgate. And whilst I don't think it does jack squat for aerodynamics because it's made of rubber that you can just literally bend like that, but I think it looks awesome and adds to the look of this car. I also have special option garnet red metallic paint on this car, which I love the look. It's not too bright of a red, it's dark and deep and makes this car look so classy and really freaking sleek. Now let's talk a little bit about the powertrain of the 944. Now the 924 had the 110 horsepower inline four-cylinder engine from basically a Volkswagen van, as was famously mentioned in the cheap Porsche challenge on Top Gear back in the day. I think it was like Series 7 or something like that. But the 944 has a bespoke Porsche engine. It's a 2.5-liter inline four that was basically half of the 928's 5-liter V8. Now, it's an 8-valve engine, and it also has 2 counter-rotating balance shafts to help even out the inherent unbalance of 4-cylinder engines. Makes the engine run a lot smoother and helps dampen some of the vibrations, which is really, really clever. Now, Porsche decided to go with this engine is because, A, it gets better fuel economy, and I don't know what they're talking about because it gets 18 city, 25 highway. Sure, back in 1986 that might have been great, but by today's standards, that's garbage. The Miata gets like a combined 31 mpg, and we drive it really hard. So fuel economy is not a strong point, but it is a lot more compact, which is good because they actually needed to mount the engine from the bottom end of the car, which made it a lot easier to do when you have a smaller, more compact engine. Now, this engine puts out 153 horsepower for European models, but since in America we care about the environment and we have our emissions regulations, that power has been strangled down to 147 horsepower, which means that this car will get from 0 to 60 in about 8-ish seconds and go on to a top speed of 137. Now, that is pretty mediocre, to say the most, by today's standards. But back in 1986, that was actually considered to be pretty quick. You got to remember that the whole emissions and like oil crisis was going on. There were emissions regulations that were strangling engines, and cars were putting out pretty pathetic power. So by all those standards, this thing was pretty quick. And Car and Driver actually said that they prefer the 944NA to the 944 Turbo for everything other than straight line speed, because they say it handles better, engine's more responsive, yada, yada, yada. Now, let's talk a little bit about the handling and a little bit more about the powertrain. Part of the reason that this car handles so well is because of the way the powertrain's positioned in the car. You have the engine up front, but the transmission is actually in the back, and the power is sent to the transmission through a torque tube. And that allows the 944 to have damn near perfect 50-50 weight distribution. It has 50.7% of its weight over the front axle and 49.3% over the rear, which means that it handles phenomenally well because it's evenly distributed, and it makes the car handle really neutrally, which is awesome. It's what you want in a sports car. Now, this 5-speed manual feels awesome to shift. Yeah, it's not the most precise shifter in the world, mainly because the shifter bushing's a little bit worn and there's a decent amount of play, but the mechanical feel that you get when you change gears is awesome. You can feel it slide into gear, you can feel the linkage click it. That was third. But yeah, you can just feel it slide into gear. It's a very mechanical experience, and the clutch feel is awesome. You can feel it bite. You can feel the clutch plates engage. It's awesome. I love the fact that you literally feel like you're one with the machine when you drive this car. And the other reason it handles so well is due to the steering. This has power steering. It's an early power steering system. You could actually still get the 944 with regular manual steering, but no one did that because, power steering was just what you wanted back in the day. It was new and it was the latest and greatest thing. So the manual steering systems are actually pretty rare. And the power steering does leak a bit, but as long as I top it up with ATF every few weeks, it's great. And the steering doesn't just respond overly quick. It's not overly boosted like a lot of electric power steering setups are in today's cars. Like the Miata steering is awesome, but it's extremely quick. You turn the wheel and you just dart, dart, dart. This steering system is a lot more natural feeling. You turn the wheel and it goes exactly where you want it to go, but at the same rate that you turn the wheel at. It's not, doesn't seem fake in a way, and I love that about this car. You turn in and the suspension is actually pretty good. It's 32 years old. I want to do Coney shocks at some point, but for a 32-year-old suspension system, there's not a lot of body roll. It corners really flat and the car is really low to the ground, which makes it feel extremely sporty and almost makes it feel like you're driving a little like rocket along the road. It's awesome, handles great, and I love the car for that. Now, in the middle of 1985, Porsche did a revamp on the 944. They gave it a new interior. They gave it cast alloy control arms and trailing arms. They revised some brackets for the transaxle mounts, and they also gave it the quintessential phone dial wheels, which I love. I think they absolutely complete the look of this car. Now, this new interior really changed the game from the old one. The old one was old, obviously, and just nasty and outdated and seemed like something out of the early 70s, which it was. And this new one just brought it up to date. It seems so much more modern. It seems like an interior you would see in a late 90s car rather than a mid 80s car. And I love the air vents. They look really fresh. I love the way that the center gauge cluster and the central vents are combined together in one oval piece that gives it a sleek look. I love the leather wrapping on the lower dash. I love the seats. I put these seats in. They're actually a real upholstery kit that I got from lseat.com, have contrast red stitching to match the paint. I also have the same contrast stitching on the shifter boot here, and I think the whole interior just comes together to be a really sleek package, especially with the awesome suede dash cover I have. I love it in here. The controls are unbelievably easy because you have two knobs. One knob adjusts the fan speed, the other one adjusts the climate, and oddly the climate is actually in Celsius instead of Fahrenheit, even though this car is sold in the States where we just can't be bothered to come and use Celsius just because we're stubborn. But I mean, the AC doesn't work. It retired a little while ago, and once the AC systems on this car go into retirement, getting them out of retirement is pretty hard, and I'm just not going to bother, at least for right now. I'm probably going to change my mind in the summer. But other than that, you have a stereo system with 4 speakers. You could also get a more premium, I think it was a 10-speaker system. This car originally had a Blaupunkt head unit, which has been replaced for an Alpine head unit, and it also has Pioneer speakers as well, which sound decent, but no one really cares because a car that's 32 years old, each one you come across is going to have a different stereo system. Now, you also have back seats. It's a 2+2 coupe, and the back seats are tiny. I've had people in there for about 4 hours before on some long trips coming back from Virginia Tech to visit my hometown, and I've actually had a guy who's 6'7". Sam, if you're watching, shout out to you for folding yourself into the back of my seats. But I had him back there for a little trip, and he actually managed to fit. The whole method is you sit on one seat, have your feet on the other, and then you can just kind of cruise around in relative comfort, if you even want to call it that. But I think I'm going to delete those seats, save myself like 20 pounds, redo the carpeting, and have it look a lot better. Now let's move on to the way that the 944 makes me feel. Now the 944 is an awesome way to get yourself into a Porsche without spending a whole lot of money. Really clean ones can be had for about 10 or 12 grand. If you want to go for something really nice, you can get one for like 15, but that's about as high as the naturally aspirated models go. You can get turbo ones going up to 70 grand if you get a Turbo S with like the rose patterned seats or whatever. Those can be extremely expensive, but I paid $22.50 for mine, and I'm all in at about 7 grand after all the mods and updates I've done to it. And I love this car, not only because it's a great car, super well balanced, and handles great, and it's a Porsche. I love it because I got this car in terrible condition. It was on its last legs. It was about to fall apart, and I brought it back. Yeah, I had the shop do the paint and the timing belt and water pump, but everything else I did in my garage with Jack, cursing over broken, stripped out bolts, trying to understand stuff from YouTube tutorials, and it was a boatload of fun because I learned a lot. Yeah, I knew how to work on cars before I got this car. I had some experience doing pretty generic maintenance items, but this car really exposed me to a whole lot more. I had to do the oil cooler seals, which involved removing the sway arm, the freaking, what else? Power steering pump. I had to almost remove the exhaust headers, which I luckily decided not to do because I didn't want to break the exhaust studs. But it was a lot of work, and going through all of that on a car this old is so gratifying because every time I turn the key, hear that engine fire up, I slam it into gear, I cruise down a back road, I hear that awesome exhaust burble. I know it's something that I've sweated for, something I've put a lot of effort into, and something that I ultimately wouldn't have if it weren't for you guys. You guys watching my channel, liking my videos, and following what I do allowed me to justify making this purchase, because I'm a tightwad and I would never have bothered to spend the amount of money I have spent on this car if it weren't for a cause. And I hope to continue to make awesome videos with this car that you guys enjoy. If you guys have suggestions for what videos you'd like to see us make on this car, definitely drop a comment or shoot us an email. If you want us to do a certain mod or drive it somewhere, or if you want to tell me that I'm an idiot for dropping so much money on this car when I'm only 19, feel free to drop a comment on that as well. Hit the subscribe button if you like what you see and you want to follow us and join the Motor Minds family, and definitely tune in and watch our next video.